when science touches the edge of separation. Have you ever felt a strange connection with someone halfway around the world? Ever thought of a loved one, and at that exact moment, your phone rings with their name? Or in moments of deep stillness, sense the boundary between you and the world outside dissolving, as if everything is just one? For centuries, we've lived with the belief that the universe is a giant machine, where everything is separate, independent, and interacts only through measurable physical forces. We believe distance is real, time is linear, and I am a separate entity existing in an alien world. But then quantum physics emerged, and with it came quantum entanglement, a discovery that shook the foundation of everything we thought we knew. Quantum entanglement isn't just a strange physical phenomenon. It's a mirror reflecting the nature of reality itself, where concepts of far and near, you and me, inside and outside begin to dissolve. Two quantum particles, once entangled, are no longer two. They don't send signals, don't transmit information, yet they respond simultaneously as if sharing the same soul. What does this mean for how we understand ourselves, our relationships, the very nature of existence? The greatest trap of the human mind isn't ignorance. It's the illusion of separation. We've become so accustomed to seeing the world as a collection of separate objects that we've forgotten this division is just a way of seeing, not absolute reality. And this very illusion has created every form of suffering, conflict, and loneliness we experience. This isn't just a journey into the fascinating world of quantum physics. It's an invitation to look deeply into the nature of reality itself, to see that what science is discovering is what consciousness has always known, that we are all one, that separation is illusion, and that in this recognition lies the key to true freedom. Let's explore the mirror of oneness, where science and spirituality meet at a miraculous common point. The paradox that isn't a paradox. When Albert Einstein first confronted quantum entanglement, he called it spooky action at a distance, expressing his discomfort with a reality that couldn't be explained by ordinary logic. Two quantum particles, after interacting, can be billions of light years apart, yet still respond instantaneously. When you measure one particle's state, the other immediately knows and adjusts its state, without any signal traveling through space. This violates every principle of classical physics, where nothing can move faster than light. But is this really a paradox? Or is it only paradoxical to our old way of seeing reality? The problem isn't the phenomenon, it's our assumptions. We assume the two particles are two separate entities, that they're here and there, that they need to communicate. But what if this assumption was wrong from start? What if at the deepest level, the two particles were never separate? Imagine looking at a coin. You see two sides, heads and tails. They seem like two different things, opposites, but they're not two separate coins. They're two aspects of the same entity. When you flip heads up, tails automatically goes down. There's no communication between the sides because they were never separate. Quantum entanglement is the same. It's not a connection between two separate things, but the manifestation of a single entity through two different forms. For anyone who's touched the absolute stillness of mind, this isn't strange at all, because in that stillness, you see that everything coexists with no distance, no time. When a mind stops dividing, stops labeling, stops creating boundaries between this and that, reality appears as it truly is, a unified field, a continuous flow, a single event manifesting through countless forms. Science took decades to accept quantum entanglement as reality, not from lack of experimental evidence. The evidence is abundant and rock solid, but because it demands a fundamental shift in how we see the world. It requires us to abandon the illusion of separation, to accept that the universe isn't a collection of independent objects, but an indivisible whole. The miraculous thing is when you truly see this, not through theory or concept, but through direct experience. The question, how can two particles communicate instantly, becomes the wrong question. There's no linking happening because there aren't two things to link. There's only a single event manifesting through many different forms. Like the moon and moonlight, they're not separate, just two different views of the same source. At the deepest level, quantum entanglement isn't action at a distance, but the revelation of the inherent unity in the nature of all existence. It's a reminder that the divisions we see in the everyday world between me and you, inside and outside, subject and object, are just a veil of illusion, a way the mind organizes experience, not absolute reality. And when this veil drops, even for a moment, you'll see that everything has always been one. Not becoming one, but always being one. Quantum entanglement is just science finally catching up with what consciousness has known forever. When science contradicts itself, there's a beautiful paradox in the history of science. The more we try to separate to understand, the closer we get to unity. The scientific method is built on analysis, breaking problems into parts, studying each part separately, then putting them together to understand the whole. For centuries, this approach brought spectacular success. We separated matter into molecules, molecules into atoms, atoms into subatomic particles. Each time we separated, we thought we were getting closer to the ultimate building block of the universe. But then something strange happened. When we went deep enough, when we looked at the quantum level, the boundaries between these building blocks began to blur. We discovered that a particle isn't a separate thing, but a possibility, a probability wave spreading through space. We discovered that a particle's state depends on the observer, that the act of measurement doesn't just look at an existing reality, but creates that reality. And most importantly, we discovered quantum entanglement, the phenomenon showing that particles cannot be described independently of each other. This is when science began contradicting itself. The analytical method, pushed to its limit, led to a non-analytical conclusion that the universe cannot be understood as a collection of separate parts. What we call particles aren't independent building blocks, but knots in an encompassing web of relationships. And this web doesn't exist in space and time. Rather, space and time emerge from this web. When scientists look at a particle and see it depends on the observer, that's when the boundary between subject and object disappears. In classical physics, the observer stands outside, objective, not affecting what's observed. But in quantum physics, this separation no longer holds. The observer and the observed are two aspects of the same process. There's no thing independent of the looker, and no looker independent of the thing. There's only a single event, the appearance of experience in the field of awareness. Who is the observer when everything co-arises in a single field of awareness? This question isn't abstract philosophy, but a real challenge to how we understand consciousness and reality. If there's no clear boundary between observer and observed, then what is the I we think is standing here looking out at the world? Modern science is at a critical crossroads. On one hand, it can continue trying to explain quantum entanglement within the old framework, searching for hidden variables or more complex theories to maintain the illusion of separation. On the other hand, it can accept what the data is showing, that reality at the most fundamental level is an indivisible whole, and that the appearance of separate things is a phenomenon dependent on how we look, not the inherent nature of reality. Interestingly, the pioneering quantum physicists, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, Wolfgang Pauli, almost all turned to philosophy and spirituality in their later years. They realized that what they discovered in the lab wasn't just about particles and waves, but about the nature of reality and consciousness. Schrödinger wrote, "Consciousness is a singular of which the plural is unknown." He saw that we're all sharing the same consciousness, like waves sharing the same ocean. Science, in its journey of separation to understand, finally reached a point where it could separate no further. And at that point, it discovered not emptiness, but fullness, a living, self-aware, indivisible whole. This isn't the end of science, but its transformation from a tool to conquer and control into a path to recognize and integrate. The web of consciousness vibrating. Reality isn't a collection of separate objects, but a web of consciousness vibrating at countless frequencies. This image isn't just a beautiful metaphor, but an accurate description of what quantum physics is showing us. Everything we see, from the most basic particle to the largest galaxy, isn't a rigid, separate entity, but a vibration pattern in the quantum field. And all these vibration patterns connect with each other, influence each other, forming a massive symphony. Humans, plants, stars, all are small oscillations in this grand music. You're not an isolated island in an ocean of unconsciousness. You're a wave in the ocean of consciousness, a musical note in a universal symphony. Every thought, every emotion, every action creates ripples spreading through the entire web. Nothing you do is private or isolated. Everything affects the whole, whether you're aware of it or not. When we hurt someone, we're breaking a string in the harmony of our own being. This isn't a moral warning, but a physical truth. If we're all parts of the same whole, then hurting others is hurting ourselves. Not metaphorically, but literally. When you cause someone suffering, you're creating a disturbance in the consciousness field that you're also part of. And that disturbance will return to you, not as punishment from outside, but as the natural consequence of living in a connected system. Conversely, when we open our hearts, the entire network vibrates at a new frequency, lighter, brighter, freer. Every time you choose compassion over judgment, understanding over reaction, presence over distraction, you're changing your vibration frequency. And because you're part of the web, this change ripples outward, affecting everyone and everything around you. This isn't magic or superficial positive thinking. This is how a connected system works. There are people who, when you're near them, you feel peaceful and light. There are others who, when you're near, you feel heavy and tense. This isn't imagination. This is resonance or dissonance between vibration frequencies. Each person emits an energy signature based on their state of consciousness. And these signatures interact with each other, creating harmonious or disharmonious patterns. But here's what's important. You're not a victim of the frequencies around you. You have the ability to choose your own frequency. When you're stable in presence, in awareness, no external frequency can disturb you. You become an anchor point, a stable center in the web. And from that stability, you can help those around you find their balance, not by trying to change them, but simply by being present with them in awareness. Imagine a still pond. When you throw a pebble in, ripples spread across the surface. If you throw multiple pebbles at once, the ripples interfere with each other, creating complex patterns. The web of consciousness is the same. Every action, every thought, every emotion is a pebble thrown into the pond. And all the ripples interact with each other, creating the reality we experience. This means you have responsibility. Not heavy, guilt-laden responsibility, but responsibility as responsibility. You have the ability to choose what kind of ripples you want to create. You have the ability to choose the frequency you want to vibrate at. And that choice, however small, has an impact on the entire web. In this view, no one is an outsider. There are no real enemies. Only different parts of the same whole, vibrating at different frequencies, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in discord. And our work isn't to defeat or eliminate the bad parts, but to raise our own frequency to a level where our presence naturally invites higher frequencies from others. This is how real transformation happens, not through conflict and conquest, but through resonance and support. When enough people begin vibrating at the frequency of awareness, of compassion, of presence, the entire web will shift to a new state. And that's true evolution. Not evolution of form, but evolution of consciousness. Redefining existence. Quantum entanglement forces us to reconsider how we define existence. In the classical worldview, for something to exist means it has a definite position in space, definite properties, and exists independently of whether anyone observes it. A rock on a moon is still a rock, whether anyone looks at it or not. This is the concept of objective reality, a world out there, independent of consciousness. But quantum physics shattered this concept. A quantum particle has no definite position until measured. Before measurement, it exists as a probability cloud spreading through space. It's not here or there. It's everywhere at once with different probabilities. Only when a measurement occurs does this cloud collapse into a specific position. And strangely, how you choose to measure affects the result you get. If you set up the experiment to measure particle, you'll see a particle. If you set up to measure wave, you'll see a wave. Reality seems to respond according to how you look at it. What does this mean? Perhaps nothing truly exists separately. Only the interaction between relationships being recognized. A particle isn't a pre-existing thing waiting to be discovered. It's an event appearing in a relationship between the measurer and the measured, between the observer and the quantum field. Existence isn't a noun, but a verb, a continuous process of appearing in relationship. Just as a wave cannot be separated from the ocean, we cannot be separated from the totality of life. A wave seems like a separate entity. It has shape, height, velocity. But if you try to separate the wave from the ocean, you no longer have a wave. The wave only exists as a movement pattern in the ocean. It's not an independent thing, but a temporary manifestation of the ocean. We're the same. We're not separate individuals existing in an alien universe. We're movement patterns in the universal consciousness field. What we call the I with a name, history, unique personality, is just a temporary pattern, a way the whole is expressing itself in this moment. And this pattern isn't separate from the whole, just as the wave isn't separate from the ocean. Only when we forget this do we begin to suffer, thinking we're abandoned in an alien universe. Most human suffering stems from this sense of separation. We feel lonely, threatened, inadequate because we think we're a small, fragile entity trying to survive in a hostile world. We spend our lives building protective walls, accumulating power and possessions, proving our worth, all stemming from this fundamental fear. But if you see that you're not a separate wave, but the ocean itself manifesting as a wave, everything changes. You no longer need to protect or prove anything. You're no longer afraid of dissolution, because you know that when the wave dissolves, the ocean remains. Actually, the ocean never went anywhere. It was always there, even while the wave was appearing. This isn't philosophical consolation, but a direct recognition that can transform how you live entirely. When you see you're not a separate entity, you stop living in defensive mode. You stop trying to control everything. You stop worrying about the future or regretting the past. You simply are present, like a wave joyfully dancing on the ocean's surface, knowing it is the ocean, always the ocean. And in that presence, you discover a beautiful paradox. When you stop trying to exist as a separate entity, you truly live. When you release the illusion of separation, you find real connection. When you accept your temporary pattern, you touch the eternal. This is the redefinition of existence that quantum entanglement invites us to make. The collapse of power and control. In this unified vision, all theories of power, control, or possession become meaningless. Our entire civilization is built on the idea of ownership and control. We want to own land, possessions, even people. We want to control the future, control others, control even ourselves. We believe happiness comes from having more power, more control, more possessions. But if we're all one, who's owning whom? Who's controlling whom? There's no who to own, because everything operates in the same breath. The idea of ownership is based on the assumption of separation, that there's an I here and a thing there, and I can take possession of that thing. But if there's no real separation, then ownership is just a game of the mind. Try thinking. Can you own sunlight? Can you control the wind? Can you possess a moment? Of course not. But you can enjoy the sunlight, dance with the wind, live fully in the moment. The difference between owning and enjoying is the difference between a separated mind and unified consciousness. When you try to own something, you're creating an artificial boundary between mine and not mine. And that boundary demands protection. You have to worry that someone will take yours. You have to build walls, security systems, laws. You live in constant tension and fear. This isn't freedom. This is imprisonment. But when you see that nothing truly belongs to you, because you and the thing are both parts of the same whole, the fear dissolves. You no longer need to protect or accumulate. You can simply interact with what appears in your life, knowing everything is temporary manifestations of the same source. This doesn't mean you become passive or irresponsible. On the contrary, when you're no longer bound by the idea of ownership, you can truly care for everything. You care not because it's mine, but because it's part of the whole that I'm also part of. You care for trees not because you own them, but because you and they breathe the same air. You care for others not because they belong to you, but because the boundary between you and them is illusion. True evolution isn't about conquering space, but recognizing that we are that space, infinite, boundaryless, without keeper. For centuries, humans have dreamed of exploration and conquest, conquering land, conquering seas, conquering space. We thought progress was about expanding territory, increasing power, controlling more. But this is external evolution, and it's reached its limit. We've conquered nearly the entire planet. But are we happier? Are we freer? Are we more peaceful? Clearly not. Because the problem isn't outside, but inside, in how we see ourselves and the world. True evolution is the evolution of consciousness. It's the shift from separated consciousness to unified consciousness, from I to we to one. And in this shift, concepts of power and control naturally dissolve. Not because we renounce them as a moral act, but because we see they no longer make sense. How can you control yourself? How can you have power over yourself? When this recognition appears, a completely new way of living becomes possible. A way of living not based on competition and conflict, but on cooperation and harmony. Not based on scarcity and fear, but on abundance and trust. Not based on taking more, but on giving and sharing. This isn't an unrealistic ideal, but the natural consequence of living from unified consciousness. The message of awakening, quantum entanglement at its deepest level, is a message of awakening. It reminds us that everything in the universe simultaneously knows about everything else, not through language, not through signals, but through the very presence of existence. This is a form of knowing completely different from ordinary knowledge. It's not knowing about something, but knowing as something. It's not information transmitted from A to B, but the identity between A and B. Science has only just described what consciousness has always known, that reality isn't connected by matter, but by awareness. In spiritual traditions of every culture, there have always been those who experience this unity. They described it in many different languages: Brahman and Atman in Hinduism, emptiness in Buddhism, the Tao in Taoism, God in Christian mysticism. But all point to the same reality, that there's a single consciousness manifesting through countless forms. For centuries, these experiences were considered supernatural or mystical, separate from the real world of science. But now, science and spirituality are meeting. Quantum entanglement is the bridge between these two worlds. It shows that what spiritual masters experienced wasn't illusion or imagination, but direct perception of the nature of reality. And when you truly see this, not through concept, but through direct experience, the boundary between observer and observed dissolves. This is the key point. You can read about quantum entanglement. You can understand the mathematical equations. You can believe in the theory of unity. But all of this is still just concept, still just knowledge about something. Real transformation only happens when you directly experience this unity. And that experience doesn't come from thinking more, but from thinking less. It doesn't come from accumulating more knowledge, but from releasing what you think you know. It doesn't come from trying to achieve a special state, but from relaxing into what's always been available. Only a single universal pulse remains, where particle and person, energy and consciousness breathe together in silence. In the moment of complete awakening, there's no you looking at the world. There's only seeing happening. There's no you hearing sound. There's only hearing happening. There's no you living life. There's only life occurring. And in this absolute simplicity, you discover you were never separate. You've always been part of the whole. Actually, part isn't the right word either, because a part implies division. You are the whole, manifesting as a specific pattern in this moment. Quantum entanglement is a reminder that the universe isn't a dead machine, but a living, self-aware being. Every particle, every atom, every cell, every creature is a center of awareness in this massive web of consciousness. And all are knowing about each other, not through physical signals, but through inherent identity. When you see a flower, the flower is also seeing you, not with eyes, but with presence. When you touch a tree, the tree is also touching you, not with flesh, but with energy interaction. When you love someone, they're also loving you, not necessarily with emotion, but with resonance at the deepest level. This isn't poetry or romanticization. This is an accurate description of how a unified universe operates. And when you live from this recognition, everything changes. You no longer feel lonely because you know you're always connected. You're no longer afraid because you know nothing can truly harm what you really are. You no longer need to prove or defend because you know you are life itself expressing. Never two, and never was two. This is the final message of quantum entanglement. The divisions we see between particle and particle, between person and person, between person and universe, are just a way of seeing a veil of perception. Behind that veil, there's always only been one. One consciousness, one life, one reality dancing in countless shapes. And you are that, not a part of it, but the whole of it experiencing itself through this specific form. When this recognition is no longer concept, but becomes lived experience, you've come home, not to a place, but to your true nature, infinite, eternal, never born, never dying. Practice guide. Week 1, observing invisible connections. Start with a simple yet profound practice. Observe the invisible connections in your daily life. Each morning, before your day begins, sit quietly for 5 minutes and recognize that everything you'll use today, from the shirt you wear, the coffee you drink, to the phone you hold, is the result of countless people and processes interconnected. Daily exercise. Choose one specific item each day and trace its origins. For example, your shirt. Who grew the cotton? Who harvested it? Who wove the fabric? Who designed it? Who sewed it? Who transported it? Who sold it? Each person in this chain has a family, a story, dreams. They invested their time and energy to create something you use unconsciously. Feel this connection, not with your mind, but with your heart. Mealtime practice. Before eating, pause. Look at your food and recognize it's a transformation of sunlight, rainwater, soil, and the farmer's labor. All these elements have entangled to create the meal before you. When you eat, you're becoming part of this transformation chain. The food will become energy, become new cells in your body. The boundary between you and food isn't as clear as you think. Week 2, expanding to relationships. Extend this practice to your relationships. Each time you interact with someone, whether family, friends, colleagues, or strangers, take a moment to recognize this person isn't a completely separate entity from you. They're breathing the same air, living on the same planet, sharing the same moment in time. At a deeper level, you're both manifestations of the same universal consciousness. Conflict practice. When conflict or disagreement arises, instead of immediately reacting, pause and ask yourself, if this person and I are both parts of the same whole, what's really happening here? You might see that the conflict isn't between two separate people, but between two perspectives, two different vibration frequencies within the same consciousness field. This recognition doesn't automatically resolve the conflict, but it shifts your approach from me against you to we're finding harmony together. Week 3, practicing co-arising. After 2 weeks of basic practice, you become more sensitive to connections. Now it's time to go deeper into the direct experience of co-arising, a state where there's no distance, no time, only pure presence. Setup. Find a quiet place where you won't be disturbed for 20 to 30 minutes. Sit comfortably back straight, but not rigid. Close your eyes and begin by observing your breath. Don't try to change it. Simply notice it happening. Breath in, breath out. There's no you breathing, only breathing occurring. Expanding awareness. After a few minutes, expand your awareness. Notice sounds around you, birds chirping, traffic, wind. But don't label them. Don't think that's a bird, that's a car. Simply let sounds appear in your awareness space, like waves appearing and dissolving in the ocean. The key step. Now recognize that these sounds aren't out there, and you aren't in here hearing them. Sound and hearing are a single event. There's no distance between sound and listener. They co-arise in the same field of awareness. Applied to all senses, body sensations, warmth, coolness, tension, or relaxation. They're not happening to you. They're simply happening in the field of awareness. Thoughts arise. They're not your thoughts. They're just energy patterns appearing and dissolving in consciousness space. What happens? As you relax deeply into this view, something miraculous begins. The sense of a separate I starts to fade. There's no one practicing anymore. Only practicing happening. No one observing anymore. Only observation occurring. Important. Don't try to achieve this state. Trying is the barrier. Just relax, let go, and allow everything to be as it is. If the mind wanders, that's okay. Wandering is also happening in the field of awareness. If frustration arises, that's okay. Frustration is just another energy pattern. This practice isn't about achieving a special state. It's about recognizing what's always been available, the co-arising of everything in a single field of consciousness. Week 4, practice with others. Bring this practice into your relationships. Choose someone, family, friend, or even a stranger you meet during the day. When you're with them, practice listening from silence. What this means, usually when someone talks to us, our mind is busy thinking about how to respond, judging what they're saying, or wandering to other things. We're not really listening. We're just waiting for our turn to talk. Listening from silence is different. You temporarily set aside all your thoughts, judgments, and reactions. You become completely present with the speaker. You don't just hear their words, but sense the energy behind them. You see them not as another person, but as a different expression of the same consciousness you're also part of. What happens? When you listen this way, something miraculous occurs. The other person senses your presence. They feel seen, heard, accepted. In that accepting space, they can relax, open up, and reveal deeper layers of themselves. The conversation becomes more profound, more authentic, the deeper recognition. More importantly, in this deep listening, the boundary between listener and speaker begins to dissolve. You recognize there aren't two separate people communicating. There's only one consciousness field expressing through two forms, communicating with itself. This isn't an idea to think about. It's a direct experience you can have when you're truly present. And this experience will transform how you relate to everyone. Practice widely. Try this with many different people. You'll discover each person is a unique window into the same reality. Each carries a different flavor of the same consciousness. And when you truly see this, judgment and discrimination naturally dissolve. Living from unity. After a month of practice, you've begun having glimpses of unity. But how do you turn these glimpses into a continuous way of living? This is the real challenge. The secret: don't try to maintain a special state. You can't hold awareness like you hold an object. Awareness isn't something you have or don't have. It's what you are. The issue isn't achieving awareness, but stopping what obscures it. 3 things that obscure awareness. 1, distraction. Happens when your mind is in the past or future, not the present. Practice. Each time you notice you're distracted, don't judge. Simply return to the present. Feel your breath. Feel your body. See what's in front of you. The present is always here. Only your mind is elsewhere. 2, judgment creates division. Each time you label something good or bad, right or wrong, you're creating an artificial boundary. Clarification. This doesn't mean you can't discern or make decisions. You can still see that an action causes harm and choose not to do it. But you don't need to label it bad or judge the person doing it as a bad person. You simply see clearly and act from that clarity. 3, identification with thoughts. The biggest barrier. Most people think they are their thoughts. When the thought, "I'm not good enough," arises, they believe it's truth about them. When the thought, "I'm afraid," appears, they think they are that fear. Truth, you're not your thoughts. You're the awareness space in which thoughts appear and dissolve. Practice. Each time you notice you're identifying with a thought, step back. Observe the thought as if it's a cloud passing through the sky. You're not the cloud, you're the sky. Clouds come and go, but the sky remains vast and unaffected. When you stop these 3 things, when you stop being distracted, stop judging, Stop identifying with thoughts. Awareness naturally shines. Not because you created it, but because you stopped obscuring it. A new way of living emerges. You no longer live from reaction, but from response. You no longer live from fear, but from trust. You no longer live from the illusion of separation, but from the recognition of unity. Important note, this doesn't mean your life becomes perfect or challenge-free. Challenges will still come, but you'll meet them from a different place. From peace instead of chaos, from clarity instead of confusion, from love instead of fear. Signs of transformation. How do you know transformation is happening? Not through mystical experiences or special phenomena, but through subtle changes in how you live daily. You'll notice less reactive. Things that used to anger or worry you no longer have the same power. Not because you're suppressing emotions, but because you see them as temporary energy patterns, not you. More connected. The sense of loneliness and separation gradually decreases. You begin sensing an invisible thread connecting you to everyone and everything. Not sentimentally, but as a quiet recognition always present. Less judgmental. You can still discern and make decisions, but there's no rigidity in your view of right and wrong. You see everyone is doing their best from their current level of awareness. More present. Your mind still sometimes wanders to past or future, but you quickly notice and return to now. You discover the present isn't a tiny moment between past and future, but all that truly exists. Less worried about the future, not because you become irresponsible, but because you trust life's flow. You still plan and act, but without clinging to outcomes. You do what needs doing and release the rest. Less regret about the past. You see, everything that happened was part of the journey bringing you here. Nothing was a mistake. Everything was learning. More natural. You stop trying to become someone or achieve something to feel complete. You relax into simply being yourself, knowing you've always been whole. Lighter. Life still has challenges, but you don't carry them as burdens. You respond to what arises and then let go. Experiencing causeless joy, not joy dependent on external conditions, but a quiet sense of happiness simply from existing. More compassionate, not as a moral effort, but as a natural response when you see we're all one. Hurting others becomes unthinkable, not from fear of consequences, but because you see it's hurting yourself. How these appear. These signs don't emerge dramatically or suddenly. They appear gradually, subtly, like dawn slowly brightening. One day you look back and realize you're no longer who you were. Not because you became someone new, but because you dropped the false layers and returned to your true nature. Coming home, quantum entanglement isn't just a physical phenomenon. It's an invitation to wake from the dream of separation, to remember your true nature, to come home. But home isn't a place you need to reach. It's not a state you need to achieve. It's what you've always been, what you can never not be. You've simply forgotten, mesmerized by the drama of separation, caught in the story of me and the world. Science's journey, science, in its journey exploring the outer world, has finally turned around and pointed inward. It discovered the observer can't be separated from the observed, that consciousness may not be a byproduct of matter, but its foundation, that everything connects in an indivisible web of relationships. This isn't the end, but the beginning, because when you see you're not a separate wave, but the ocean itself, the question is no longer how can I survive, but becomes how can I most fully express my nature, living from unity. When you live from the recognition of unity, every action becomes an expression of love, not love as emotion, but love as the recognition there's no other. Every word becomes a bridge instead of a wall. Every decision is made not just for my benefit, but for the benefit of the whole, because I and the whole aren't two. The evolution we're called to. This is the evolution humanity is being invited to make. Not evolution of technology or power, but evolution of consciousness. From separated consciousness to unified consciousness. From fear to love. From control to trust. From taking to giving. From conquering to integrating. You don't need to wait. You don't need to wait for others. You don't need to wait for a global movement or systemic change. Transformation begins with you, right now, in this moment. Every time you choose presence over distraction, compassion over judgment, connection over separation, you're changing the vibration frequency of the consciousness web, the ripple effect. Because we're all connected, your change ripples outward, touching those around you, and through them, touching others, creating a wave of transformation invisible yet profound. The mirror of oneness. Quantum entanglement is the mirror of oneness. When you look into this mirror, not just with your mind, but with your whole being, you won't see a reflection of a separate me, but the reflection of everything. You'll see you are the universe looking at itself, recognizing itself, loving itself. And in that recognition, you come home. Not to a place, but to your true nature. Infinite, eternal, never born, never dying, always one. Welcome home. Final reminder. Don't turn this into a new belief system. Don't make it a theory to argue or defend. These words are just fingers pointing at the moon. Don't mistake the finger for the moon. Reality can't be grasped through words or concepts. It can only be directly experienced. So don't just read about quantum entanglement, about unity, about oneness. Live it. Experiment with it. Let it transform you from within. Remember, you don't need to go anywhere. Don't need to become anyone. You just need to wake from the dream of separation and recognize what's always been true, that you're life expressing itself, that you're consciousness recognizing itself, that you are love loving itself. Everything else is just variations of this simple truth. Live from that truth, and you'll discover life isn't a problem to solve, but a mystery to be lived fully. The practice is the path. The path is the practice, and you're both.